Let's talk about the ICE crackdown. Kate, an ICE agent killed a woman in Minneapolis. Two other people were shot in a separate incident. They were injured, and that took place in Oregon. But getting back to the shooting and the killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis, this is how the Secretary for Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, characterized that killing. And this was in an interview with CNN. Let's listen.
If you look at what the definition of domestic terrorism is, it completely fits the situation on the ground. This individual, as you saw in the video that we released just 48 hours after this incident, showed that this officer was hit by her vehicle. She weaponized it.
So, Kate, what is your response to that?
That's really maddening to watch her doubling down on the lie. I've seen the video. I've seen the video from many angles. I know most of us have at this point. I think one of the things, other than the outright murder of Renee Nicole Good, is the way that Kristi Noem immediately, only minutes after, which she was many states away, came on and spoke to the American public as if she knew what had happened and told lies about the event. And it's very, very clear that this agent, who had his own sensitivities because a prior incident, was out there circling Renee's car, and if you watch the video closely, he moves his cell phone as he's on the passenger side from his right hand to his left hand so that he can draw his weapon. He puts himself in front of her vehicle, which is law enforcement 101. You do not do that as a police officer, put yourself in front of a vehicle. And then he shot her 3 times in the head and swore an expletive about her as her car was careening into a pole. It's very clear that this was a murder, and that is just as shocking as the response from the administration. One would expect that an administrative official would come on media after an event like that and say, this is a very unfortunate incident. We will launch an investigation. We don't know precisely what happened. There's video to review and investigation to be completed. And we're not going to lie to the American people about what happened. But that's not what they did. Kristi Noem lied to us. The president lied to us. And we all have eyes. We all can see the video. And I think that's one of the things that's going to come back in consequence to this administration, is when they try to convince us about something that's so blatantly a lie. It's not going to go over, and it isn't going over well with the American public.
Now, Kate, there is an investigation underway, but when we see officials in this administration rush to the microphones after a killing like this and draw their own conclusions about it, effectively saying, look, we know what happened, case closed, doesn't that actually prejudice the investigation?
Absolutely, it prejudices the investigation, and we all see it for what it is. And I will also say that this is a very predictable consequence of the actions of ICE. We know that these cities, these localities like Minneapolis, do not want ICE to come in, that there are protesters, and when they have difficulties hiring and they shorten the training timeline of these ICE agents and they put them out on the streets and they're untrained and they have guns and there are protesters present and these law enforcement officers do not understand or know how to escalate, this is what happens. And anybody with 2 brain cells saw this coming a mile away. And this was such an unfortunate and avoidable event. And unfortunately, the administration is doubling down when what we would expect them to do is at least express some regret. I haven't even heard, and maybe they have, I have not heard an official from the administration say, this was an unfortunate event, and we're sorry for her family and her 6-year-old child, who probably right now, as we speak, is crying for his mom and wondering where she is.
Jaden, the White House has termed Renee Good a domestic terrorist. Here's Vice President J.D. Vance. Let's listen.
What I'm certain of is that she accelerated in a way where she ran into the guy. I don't know what was in her heart and what was in her head, but I know that she violated the law, and I know that officer was acting in self-defense.
All right, so Jaden, administration officials also say that she was using that vehicle as a weapon against the agent. Others, as we have heard, say that she posed no threat. What do you make of this case?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's not a case, right? She is dead. Yeah. That being said, though, what we do know is that sanctuary jurisdictions have put in place policies that have put their own citizens at risk. The federal government, as the Supreme Court has ruled time and again, has unilateral jurisdiction when it comes to immigration. Today, we see that no less than 2 states have now sued to stop DHS and its enforcement of immigration. But it was the Biden administration themselves that argued back when Texas was famously trying to enforce immigration law unilaterally arguing the federal government was not, that they alone, the federal government alone, had the authority. And this is the natural conclusion when we have encouragement from elected officials telling them to disobey federal agents and to get in the way of officers who are duly sworn to protect the Constitution and uphold the law. I understand many people do not like immigration law in the United States, but the way to solve that is not to impede the federal enforcement of said immigration law. It is to lobby your legislators to change it and not to put yourself in physical danger in the way of federal agents looking to enforce and execute that law. Certainly, there are going to be agents who may have sensitivities to something that has happened before. I think we see that with police. We don't know, unfortunately, because she is dead, what her intent was. We can assume that her intent was to put herself or impede or slow down. Maybe she was just there to watch. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, she is dead, and we're doing some, Monday morning quarterbacking on both the intentions of the individual who is unfortunately deceased and also on the actions of the agents, in not talking about the fact that the jurisdictions themselves are ultimately responsible because they're not engaging with the federal government in a way that ensures that this immigration policy, which, by the way, was a large part of why Trump was elected because of the failures of the previous administration, to enforce. And that needs to be a part of this conversation, because if we don't get people to respect federal law, then we will have lawlessness, and we will definitely have additional deaths in the enforcement of immigration law.
Joseph Williams, what is your response to what Jaden said there? I mean, as Jaden pointed out, there is no case because Renee Good died, she was killed in this incident, but there is also the question of accountability, isn't there?
Well, yeah, I think what Jaden was saying there was patently absurd on a couple of different levels. I mean, the first being that, yes, a woman has died because of an encounter with a police. Now, as a black man in America, I can tell you, I can probably tick off on the fingers of one hand off the top of my head the number of times this has happened to black people in America. So don't. It's a fallacy to assume that this is a random occurrence and that this woman placed herself in harm's way. We know from evidence and from past cases that's not how police behave in these sorts of situations. The second thing is that very clearly she was not the subject of immigration enforcement, and at very least should have been allowed to leave the scene. We don't know what's in her heart because she is dead, and to assume that she had ill intent by the administration and by your esteemed guest, I think is just ludicrous on a couple of levels and frankly insulting. And I think thirdly, the fact that this officer did place himself in harm's way, we've heard from many different experts that training 101 for police stops is to not walk in front of the vehicle. This woman was also given conflicting instructions. And if you're talking about sanctuary cities, cities are not standing in the way of ICE. They're just not cooperating with them. And ICE is not built to do what the president has asked them to do, right, which is conduct law enforcement operations in a major metropolitan area with virtually no training or understanding of who lives there and what goes on in those neighborhoods.
John Fishwick, what do you think should happen legally in this case? Because there's another factor that enters into it, and that this investigation is being carried out exclusively by federal officers. The local police on the ground, they're not involved.
Well, our country seems to be at a boiling point over this shooting that took place in Minneapolis. So I think it's critical that we have a fair, transparent investigation by the FBI. And time will tell if they do that. The legal question is whether this officer reasonably feared for his life at the time he fired those 3 bullets into that car and to hit Miss Good. So that's the legal question. They need to look at all the videos, interview all the witnesses. They need to interview the officer. And I do think what happened in that previous incident when he was dragged by another person when he was doing his job, that is, relevant to his conduct here. But it comes down to what he did and what he knew in those few seconds. Our country has a history of backing law enforcement in these situations. We don't want to second guess them, but I think we need a full, transparent investigation. There's a lot of pressure on the FBI and on Pam Bondi because they are saying they do not want to work with the state and local officials on this investigation. I think that's a mistake. Our country does best when state, local, and federal law enforcement works together on task forces. That makes law enforcement safer. It makes our community safer. So the FBI is under the gun here. This is a very tall task that they have, that people will have confidence in their investigation. And right now, just from, you can tell from the panelist discussions on this, folks don't have confidence in that, and there's a real disagreement about what happened here. But we need a transparent investigation that people have confidence in, and time will tell if that happens.
Kate, President Trump campaigned on removing undocumented migrants, but if we look at how this immigration crackdown is being carried out, it seems that the legal process has been abandoned in many instances. I mean, we have cases where many people, in fact, there are thousands of people in the United States who applied for asylum. They are waiting for their cases to be adjudicated. They're waiting for the process to go through. Yet, if they are stopped by ICE, in many instances they are arrested and also deported. And in many instances, people are being deported and not given access to lawyers. They are, by law, I would imagine, entitled to legal representation, aren't they?
They are entitled to access to attorneys, but rights are being violated and constitutional rights are being violated across the board. I am an immigration lawyer in Texas. I represent people who go to court hearings and they go to their ICE check-ins, and I can confirm it is absolutely true that people who are on the pathway to legal status, they are following the rules, they're doing everything right, they show up for their appointments, and they are getting detained. I have a client named Carmen who was separated from her U.S. citizen husband and her 6 U.S. citizen daughters, was ultimately detained for 2 months and deported. I have Venezuelan clients who go to their ICE check-ins, a father, a mother, 2 young daughters, ages 4 and 10. This entire family followed the legal process, and they were separated in detention. These 2 little girls were sent to one detention, mom was sent somewhere else, dad was sent somewhere else. The studies and the statistics show us the vast majority of people who are being detained and deported have no criminal history whatsoever. So what Trump told everyone he was going to do during his campaign is not the way that it's playing out. Our numbers are at the highest that they've ever been in ICE detention. We had more people die in ICE detention last year than we ever have before, and it is heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. It's enraging and it's maddening. And that's why we see cities like Minneapolis respond to ICE coming in. The police forces in these cities, they want to have a good relationship with the community. They are all about public safety. They don't want to enforce ICE policies. And if ICE was behaving and they weren't going in and kidnapping people off the streets and committing human rights abuses, they wouldn't be experiencing the pushback that they are.
Right.
So ICE needs to behave and actually go after people who really are dangerous criminals, and that's not what's happening. And anybody who tells you otherwise is flat out lying.